The UFC has given some clearly undeserving fighters a crack at the title, despite the organization having in place an official fighter ranking system since early 2013. Title shots appear to be handed out with surprising casualness. This isn't something new, but it's something that has always frustrated fight fans. In this video, we're going to list some of the most undeserving title shots in UFC history, so stay tuned to find out. Starting off with number 15, Randy Couture vs. Tim Sylvia at UFC 68 in 2007. Couture was defeated by Chuck Liddell for the second time in 3 meetings at light heavyweight. Afterward, he declared his retirement from the sport. A little over a year later though, the Natural was back in the octagon, this time not competing at light heavyweight. It had been since 2002 since Couture had fought at heavyweight, so he made the move up there. He jumped to the front of the line to challenge Sylvia for the championship. Later, Couture held a clinic. He dominated the taller Sylvia for the entire 25 minutes of the bout, and the judges awarded him a unanimous decision victory. At 43 years old, he won the UFC title at the oldest age ever. Before losing to Brock Lesnar at UFC 91, he successfully defended the title once. Next, at number 14, Gilbert Melendez vs. Benson Henderson at UFC on Fox 7 in 2013. When Strikeforce ceased operations and its combatants were incorporated into the UFC, Melendez was the reigning lightweight champion. Despite his lack of octagon experience, Melendez was immediately elevated to a position of the top contender in the deep and talented lightweight division. On top of that, El Niños's most recent Strikeforce bout, a split decision win over Josh Thompson, was very lackluster, which didn't help matters. A shot at champion Benson Henderson was granted, but he lost a close decision. Moving on to number 13, Ken Shamrock vs. Tito Ortiz at UFC 40 in 2002. This battle was motivated primarily by animosity between Shamrock and Ortiz. Shamrock was starting to show his age at 38. He had lost a split decision to Don Frye at Pride 19 and hadn't fought in the UFC in almost 6 years. Nonetheless, he was unexpectedly pitted against Ortiz, who was younger and more vicious, for the light heavyweight title. After 3 rounds of punishment from the Huntington Beach bad boy, Shamrock's team wisely decided to call it a night and stop the fight. For Shamrock, this bout was a pivotal moment in his illustrious career. Since then, he has a record of 3-7, with 2 of those defeats coming at the hands of Ortiz. Coming up at number 12, Dan Henderson vs. Anderson Silva at UFC 82 in 2008. In 2007, Henderson returned to the UFC after previously holding the titles of Pride middleweight and welterweight. Although Henderson lost a unanimous decision against light heavyweight champion Quinton Rampage Jackson at UFC 75, he was still given an opportunity at Anderson Silva's middleweight title after this crushing defeat. In this championship bout, he fared worse than expected and lost by submission to a rear naked choke in the second round. Henderson won the Strikeforce light heavyweight championship afterward, but unfortunately never experienced the feeling of having a UFC placed around his waist. Next, at number 11, Frank Trigg vs. Matt Hughes at UFC 45 in 2003. Before signing with the UFC, Trigg had a record of 10-1 and was the welterweight champion of the World Fighting Alliance. Nonetheless, he won most of his bouts in lower profile events. Hughes defeated Hayato Sakurai, his only previous opponent in the UFC, at UFC 36. Despite this, Trigg was given a crack at the championship in his debut with the promotion, and he was promptly submitted in the first round by a standing rear naked choke, and thus began Trigg and Hughes' intense rivalry. 2 years later, Trigg had another chance to fight Hughes, but was again defeated in the first round by a rear naked choke. Moving on to number 10, Justin Ehlers vs. Andrei Arlovski at UFC 53 in 2005. At UFC 51, Paul Buentello brutally knocked out Ehlers, and Arlovski's interim title battle with Rico Rodriguez was unexpectedly rescheduled with Ehlers as the new opponent. Ideally, Buentello would have faced Arlovski next, but the UFC claimed that the headhunter wasn't healthy enough to compete in the main event at UFC 53, yet he still competed in the undercard. Arlovski shredded Ehlers like a piece of tissue paper and won the bout with a first round technical knockout. After Ehlers was defeated by Brandon Vera in the bout after that, he was released from the organization. After that, Ehlers went on a 10-2 run, but he was sadly killed before he could return to the octagon for another chance at UFC Gold. Coming up at number 9, Kenny Florian vs. Jose Aldo at UFC 136 in 2011. As of then, the Ultimate Fighter Season 1 alumnus Florian was the only UFC fighter to have competed in all 4 weight classes. classes. He had previously made 2 tries to win the lightweight championship, but had failed both times. After losing an eliminator match for the lightweight title against Gray Maynard, Florian moved down to the featherweight division. In his UFC featherweight debut, he faced Diego Nunes and won by a unanimous decision. He was subsequently given a shot at the title against Jose Aldo. For the entire 5 rounds, Aldo dominated him, and the judges agreed. Later on, after retirement, he became a bout analyst and commentator, and a very good one too. Next, at number 8, Antonio Bigfoot Silva versus Cain Velasquez at UFC 160 in 2013. Bigfoot was pounded to a bloody pulp by Velasquez in their first UFC fight. To be fair though, he did bounce back impressively, defeating Travis Brown and Alistair Overeem in a quick succession. The victory by Overeem was outstanding, but came as a complete shock. Since the UFC had few options in the heavyweight category, Bigfoot was offered a title chance once again against Velasquez only a year after their first battle. Velasquez, though, wasted no time in dispatching Bigfoot this time around, knocking him out at the 1 minute 21 second mark of the first round. This demonstrated that a fighter's improvement can't be determined only from the record of recent victories. Moving on to number 7, Frankie Edgar versus Jose Aldo at UFC 156 in 2013. After losing the lightweight title belt twice to Benson Henderson, Edgar went down to featherweight and was given a title shot against Jose Aldo right away. The answer has been in several battles that were too close to call over the years, and this one was no exception. Yet each of the 3 judges eventually gave the fight to Aldo via unanimous decision. Coming up at number 6, BJ Penn versus Georges St-Pierre at UFC 94 in 2009. Penn was the undisputed UFC lightweight champion, but hadn't fought at 170 pounds in nearly 3 years. He had lost 2 straight welterweight bouts, the first to St-Pierre and the second to then champion Matt Hughes. GSP thoroughly dominated the prodigy throughout the course of 4 rounds. Penn was courageous, but he was worn out. When it became clear that Penn could no longer compete, his camp gave up. As a result, St-Pierre won by technical knockout and was declared the victor. Next, at number 5, Jake Shields versus Georges St-Pierre at UFC 129 in 2011. Shields, like Melendez, rode a wave of inflated expectations when he left Strikeforce. He hadn't been knocked out in 5 years and was fresh off a unanimous decision win against Hall of Famer Dan Henderson. After a close split decision victory over Martin Kampmann, he was quickly moved up to challenge GSP for the UFC championship. The card had an unprecedented promotion, and the resulting pay-per-view set several new benchmarks. Unfortunately, the fight didn't live up to its expectations. It was a dull snoozer of a battle, and St-Pierre won a unanimous decision thanks to the judges' scorecards. Moving on to number 4, Nick Diaz versus Georges St-Pierre at UFC 158 in 2013. Everything about this bout felt like an episode of a soap opera. Diaz fought Carlos Condit for the interim belt at UFC 143, while St-Pierre recovered from a knee injury. Unfortunately for Diaz, he was defeated in that bout via unanimous decision, which later on led to his retirement. On top of that, a positive test for marijuana metabolites resulted in a 9-month suspension for Diaz as well. GSP returned and promptly beat Condit. Diaz was then chosen as his next opponent despite widespread expectations that the surging Johnny Hendricks would be his next foe. St-Pierre threatened to deliver the worst thrashing of the Stockton Bad Boys' life. To no one's surprise, the bout lasted the standard 25 minutes though. Diaz, dissatisfied with the outcome, retired again for the second time. Coming up at number 3, Brock Lesnar versus Randy Couture at UFC 91 in 2008. Former heavyweight champion Frank Mir easily submitted Lesnar with a knee bar at UFC 81. Despite losing, the UFC continued to capitalize on Lesnar's popularity as a WWE crossover star. Following his victory over Heath Herring by a unanimous decision in their second UFC encounter, Lesnar faced Randy Couture for the heavyweight championship. He was so much heavier than Couture that he was able to use his superior strength to bully the smaller man around the ring. In the second round, Lesnar won via technical knockout and eliminated the Natural. Despite making 2 successful defenses of the championship, Lesnar ultimately lost it against Cain Velasquez and retired as a result of issues from diverticulitis. Next, at number 2, Chael Sonnen versus John Jones at UFC 159 in 2013. The fact that Sonnen was the only UFC fighter to come close to defeating prime Anderson Silva was his biggest claim to fame. Since then, he was able to capitalize on this success by taking on other high-profile opponents. Sonnen's incessant yapping earned him a coaching position on season 17 of The Ultimate Fighter, where he would face light heavyweight champion John Jones. Even though the American gangster hadn't fought at 205 in 7 years, the UFC gave him him another chance. Jones absolutely destroyed Sonnen. He pounded him with punches and elbows until the official stopped the bout at 4 minutes and 33 seconds into the opening round. Finally, at number 1, John Lober versus Frank Shamrock at UFC Brazil in 1998. At Super Brawl 3, Lober prevailed over Shamrock via a split decision. He then went 0-5-1 in his next 6 fights after the triumph, yet he still got an opportunity at the UFC light heavyweight champion, Ken Shamrock. His previous victory over Shamrock was more important than his actual performance in the ring in securing this bout. When Lober submitted to Shamrock's punches at 7 minutes and 40 seconds of the first round, it was evident that this was the case. And that is a wrap on this video. Do you agree with our list? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit like, share, and subscribe to our channel. See you at the next one.